Good evening. My name is George, and I'm an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur since I was a child. When I was a teenager, I created a formula, and I thought with this formula, I could accomplish anything. It was part focus, part determination, a huge spoonful of optimism, and a lot of hard work. And I applied this to a few different businesses, started a record company, started a mortgage company, successful. In my mid-20s, I started buying real estate. I bought a 4-unit apartment building, then a 19-unit apartment building, then a 60-unit apartment building, then a 298-unit apartment building. And what I would buy is the most challenged properties, the ones that other people had failed at. They were in foreclosure, bankruptcy. And I would take these properties and I turned them into something great. And I thought that if I kept applying my formula, I could do this for larger and larger projects. So I kept buying. I started buying out of state. I grew up in California, so that's where I initially bought, but soon I was buying in Missouri and Oklahoma. And eventually, in 2002, I found myself at a bankruptcy court auction in Columbus, Ohio. And the auction was for Woodland Meadows Apartments. Now, Woodland Meadows was 1,100 units, one of the largest complexes in the country. And it was nicknamed Uzi Alley. Now, the reason for that was that the property was infested with gangs, drugs, prostitutes. But I thought, if I applied my formula, focus, determination, optimism, and hard work, that I could turn this property around. And I remember after I won the property, as I exited the courthouse, I called my friend, Brad, and I said, I felt really good. I felt I'd done good so far, but this is going to be it. This is going to put me on the major stage. I called my friend and I said, I'm in Kobe's league now, referring to Kobe Bryant, the Los Angeles Lakers star. And I really thought that this was going to be it. I was maybe a little bit naive, and this will sound it, but I went out to the property, and I talked to some of the gang members, I talked to some of the drug dealers, some of the prostitutes, and I said, hey, I have a vision that is going to make this property great, but I need your help. I will partner you with contracts. I'll partner you with office staff. We will give you skills to give you jobs at the property, and you're going to be part of this renovation. And not all of them bought into it, but some of them did. And we underwent this program over 2 years. And at the end of 2 years, the property was transformed. It was renovated, well occupied, people were paying their rent, all the gangs, the drugs, the prostitutes were gone. And the property, it had been nicknamed Uzi Alley before I bought it. And now, after 2 years, Uzi Alley was dead. And I remember the day that I knew it was dead. A flight attendant for Southwest Airlines came to the property, was interested in a place to stay. She looked around. It was well located. The unit was nice, spacious, and she said, I want to move in. And at that point, Uzi Alley was dead, and we had Woodland Meadows. Success. I was ready for another challenge. But 2 weeks later, I had a call that started the greatest challenge of my life. And it was on Christmas Eve, 2004. The manager from Woodland Meadows called, and I'd gone home to spend Christmas with my parents and my siblings in Los Angeles. So the manager called frantically and said, there was an ice storm out here last night. The property is devastated. And I'm from California, so you say ice storm, and it doesn't really register that that's much of a big deal. You don't have ice storms in California. But he went on to relay the following. Temperatures -8 degrees outside. The power was knocked out to more than half the city of Columbus, including, unfortunately, Woodland Meadows. Once the power went down, the boilers that supplied heat to all the apartments, they went down too. And once the heat went down, all the pipes that provide water to these units, they all froze. So we had thousands of people living at this property with no heat, no power, and no water, and temperatures sub-zero. The next day I flew back, and as I walked around the property before going into the office, and I looked around, and there were light poles down into buildings, light poles just down, and it looked bad, but it didn't look that bad. There was so much snow on the ground that actually it looked kind of like a nature park. It was really a very pretty property. But as I got into the office, all the tenants and employees were coming in. What are we going to do? At this point, the power was still out. And it ended up being out for 4 days. But we had insurance. We had almost $50 million in insurance. So I called the insurance carrier and said, hey, we have a situation here. What are we going to do? And they sent someone out, and they said, they looked around, and they said, okay, we're going to get back to you. And the next day they called, and they said, the loss isn't covered. You have no insurance. And I said, well, why is that? We have $50 million in insurance. And they said, well, no, the damage was caused by the boilers, and what you needed to have was boiler endorsements. So you don't have boiler endorsements, hence you have no coverage. So I got on the phone with my attorney and said, hey, here's the policy, here's what they're saying. And he said, you're covered, you're going to get money. They're just making excuses to not get you as much money. And so we filed a lawsuit against the insurance company. And by this point, I owned about 4,000 apartment units across the country, and all my other properties were doing well. So I had to do something for this property to start getting it renovated. So I started taking loans out on my other properties, the ones that were doing well. I took out loans and used that money to fund the renovation of Woodland Meadows, thinking that, well, as soon as I get this insurance settlement, eventually I'm going to settle with them, then I can pay back all these loans. And initially, we thought that the damage was maybe $4 or $5 million. But then we spent $4 or $5 million, and there was still a lot of work to do. We kept finding more and more damage that had been inflicted on our property. So soon we were at $10 million. And by summer, I had borrowed all the money I could. I had no more money to borrow, and I was out of money. And the insurance company still wasn't paying. And so the 200 people that we had each day working at the property had to shrink that down to 20. But we still had people working at the property. So I said, okay, we're going to do this. My formula, focus, determination, optimism, and hard work, it was still with me. I was going to make this thing work. But I only had 20 people. So the city started coming out, and they said, hey, you're not done with your work. What's going on? And I said, well, we're suing the insurance company. It's taking a long time. We're still working. We're making progress. I'm going to get this done. I'm certain we're going to get this done. They said, well, we want you to come down for weekly meetings with the city to update on your progress. And I said, sure, we'll do that. And that's what we did. And each week I'd go down, I'd update them on our progress, and they seemed satisfied. But one day, I went down in November of 2005. I went down for my weekly meeting with the city, and the demeanor had changed. They said, we're going to shut down Woodland Meadows. Now, at that point, I was exhausted. Financially, I was fraying. I really was on financial fumes. And physically, I was exhausted. And I'll tell you, for the first time in my life, I thought that my formula might not work. And to tell you the truth, I couldn't respond. I really felt like I wanted to cry. But I was in this meeting, So they told me, we're going to shut down Woodland Meadows. We're going to set up a relocation center at the property next week. And their justification for this was that one of their inspections, they had turned up a construction defect, a shortcut that was done by one of the prior owners to the property. And as a result of this defect, or shortcut, the buildings, and we had 122 buildings, they were all subject to imminent collapse. Now, the work was done almost 15 years before, so it seemed ludicrous. So I hired an engineer, and the engineer came out, did a study, and said, there's no problem. These aren't subject to imminent collapse. So I called my attorney, and my attorney said, we devised a plan. We said, we're going to go to court. We're going to get a temporary restraining order against the city. And we're going to bar the city from shutting down Woodland Meadows. We're going to bar the city from vacating this property. And the city came out, and they issued 3-day evacuation notices saying that we're going to evacuate this property under this falsehood of this imminent collapse story. But we went into court, and in court, the city conceded that they really didn't have a basis for their argument. So we agreed that we would take, over the next 6 months, we would complete this property. And if I could do it in 6 months, then the city would back off. Now, I told my attorney, make the best deal you can with the insurance company, and let's use that money. We're going to finish this thing up and put this all behind us, and we're going to make Woodland Meadows great, even better than before, and my formula is going to work. Now, the problem is, that the city went to HUD and asked HUD to terminate our Section 8 contracts. More than 40% of the units there were occupied by Section 8 tenants. The other 60% were occupied by market rate units. And they asked HUD to terminate the unit, terminate the contracts. So HUD came out there and they said, hey, there's damage from the storm. You have 30 days to finish all this work. Now, we had just agreed with the city and the court that we had 6 months to complete the work. And we made a deal with the insurance company to settle the loss for $32 million. Now, $32 million, you say, that's a lot of money, and by all accounts, it's a huge amount of money. But we spent 45. So we had spent $45 million to get 32. It was welcome, but it wasn't going to be enough. But we took it anyway. We started working. But now HUD was out there saying you have 30 days to finish the work. Now, I was back up to 200 people a day. So I made it 300 people a day working at the property to restore the property. But on the 30th day, HUD came out and said, you're not done, your contracts are terminated. 6 months later, the property was vacant. The property was shortly thereafter demolished by the city, and the city eventually took ownership of the property. I lost Woodland Meadows, and all those properties that I had borrowed money on to put together Woodland Meadows, I lost all those too. In fact, over 18 months, I went from owning 4,000 apartment units, having a net worth of tens of millions of dollars, to having a zero net worth, and actually a negative net worth, because I had almost, even after losing everything, I had almost $26 million in debt. And in that final 6 months, everything went wrong. I was arrested. The city said that they were going to file criminal charges, felony charges, things that never actually, in most cases, happened, but the fact that it made it into the newspaper, I went from being a hero to a zero, or even less than a zero. And so as I look back, I had to move out. I was the last person to move out of Woodland Meadows, and at that point, everyone else had gone. And I moved into another property, which I still owned, but was in foreclosure, and I just moved into a unit there. And I started thinking, what am I going to do now? And I said, well, I hadn't mentioned this, but I was a high school dropout, not in a bad way. It's just that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I was a high school dropout. I had bad credit. I had millions of dollars of judgments against me. If you do a Google search on me, you'll find that I've been arrested, that there's been felony charges filed against me. So what am I going to do? And if I just focused on that, I really did want to cry. But I said, even though I've lost everything, I still have one thing left. And that was my formula. Focus, determination, optimism, and hard work. So I figured if I'd done it before, even though everything I had over those 15 years was lost, I could do it again. And that's what I was going to do. So I'd start other projects. I'd find other projects. But this time I had no money. So I had to go to investors, to partners, and say, hey, I have this project. I've done all the numbers. Here's what I'm going to do, step by step by step. I've done this dozens of times before, and I've always succeeded. Except once, at Woodland Meadows. So I want you to participate with me. I want you to partner with me. And I found good deals. So people were saying, they were always initially interested, saying, yeah, this looks great. We want to be your partner. And I was okay, this is a start. I'm going to do it again. I'm using my formula, I'm going to do it again. But repeatedly, a couple weeks later, I'd get a call, and everyone would do background checks. And the background checks would come up, and they would say, tell us about Woodland Meadows. And I'll tell you, when I got those calls, I did want to cry, because I learned that no one wanted to do business with a loser.